Very good afternoon, everybody. Very warm welcome to Victoria Memorial Hall. And today, I welcome you all to this fabulous new lecture that we are able to bring to you in collaboration with INTACH Calcutta Chapter on the culinary heritage of West Bengal. A very interesting topic and a very interesting topic to kick off our World Heritage Week celebrations. So throughout the week, we are going to have many more interesting programs. Please stay tuned to our social media, our website. Keep getting our updates and keep attending all our events. We are very happy to have two luminary speakers with us today. We'll begin with Professor Utsa Ray's lecture. Very warm welcome, madam. Professor Ray teaches history at Jadavpur University, Kolkata. Her book on culinary culture in colonial India was published by Cambridge University Press, and she has also published in journals like Modern Asian Studies, Indian Economic and Social History Review, and South Asian History and Culture. Before I hand over to Professor Ray, I would request our collaborator, Mr. Kapoor, to come and welcome the crowd from INTACH's side.
Thank you, Ashwini. Very warm welcome to all of you in this curtain raiser to the World Heritage Week, as Ashwini just mentioned. We normally have a series of events under the INTACH banner also every year, and in fact this program should have been held on the World Food Day, but because of some circumstances we had to defer it, and we thought this would be an ideal situation to kick off the World Heritage Week. And World Heritage Week basically is event held all over, is a series of events held all over the country, basically to create awareness of heritage, both tangible and intangible, amongst the people at large. And we, in fact, would like to stress on not only the built heritage, but also on the cultural and intangible heritage. So that's why culinary heritage, we feel, is one of the most important aspects of our civilization. And when we have two luminaries, as she mentioned, I thought it would be a great event to kick off the program. Thank you very much, and I'm sure you'll enjoy the evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Before I invite Dr. Ray, Professor Ray, ma'am, the stage is all yours.
Am I audible? Okay. So I would first like to thank Calcutta Chapter of INTACH and Victoria Memorial for inviting me to present this paper on the occasion of World Heritage Week, and especially Mr. Kapoor, who, because we have been coordinating, negotiating on dates for quite a long time. Okay, so without much ado, I'll just go over to my paper. Raymond Sokolov has once argued that culinary traditions in almost all countries are results of radical change, of additions of exotic ingredients, and importations of ideas from all over the world. Thus, Mexican food bears little resemblance to the almost meatless food of the Aztecs. I argue in this paper that as a result of constant interactions of different cuisines, a hybrid cuisine was produced in colonial Bengal. Changing eating patterns in colonial Bengal revolved around the issues of hybridity and authenticity. These issues operated at two levels. On one level, British food was appropriated within the fold of quote-unquote traditional cuisine to create a modern cuisine. In this context, some of the indigenous elites clamored for retaining the authenticity of food, while some of them welcomed new food. However, what I'm going to argue is both these positions need to be problematized. Curry powder was accepted only as a new ingredient for cooking and was regarded by the Bengali cookbook writers to be a figment of British imagination. On the other hand, both British and Bengali ingredients were combined to create a hybrid recipe. But proving the hybrid to be authentic became a primary concern. Thus, hybridity and authenticity were merely flip sides of one coin. I'll specifically look at naming of food items in order to see, and that's why it's called What's in a Name, how these issues of authenticity and hybridity played a role in the quotidian practices of eating. The first Bengali cookbook, Pak Rajeshwar, came out in 1831. The next book that followed was Banjan Ratnakar in 1858. In 1879, another book called Pak Prabandha was published, which was written by a Bengali woman most probably, but her name is not found. However, the book that first became significant as a Bengali cookbook was written by Biprodash Mukhopadhyay. This was Shokhin Khadyo Pak, published in 1889, and later 2 volumes of Shokhin Khadyo Pak were combined and published as Pak Pranali. Before this, he also used to publish a monthly periodical of recipes called Pak Pranali in 1883. The next significant Bengali cookbook that came out in 1907 was Progya Sundari Devi's Amisho Niramish Ahar. Although they wrote in Bengali, the authors of Pak Rajeshwar and Banjan Ratnakar made it clear that they were not writing for the general Bengali population. These cookbooks were written under the patronage of the King of Burdwan, and authors of these 2 recipe books claim that these recipes were drawn from the Mughals. And they were definitely not writing, a book on what today we would call Bengali food or Bengali recipes. They were mostly oriented towards non-vegetarian dishes, especially fowl and mutton. However, what is interesting is mutton recipes hardly contained any onion or garlic. The author of Pak Rajeshwar clearly stated that since most people hardly consumed onion, he had refrained from listing it as an essential ingredient in the recipes. Banjan Ratnakar also did not include onion and garlic in its repertoire of recipes. It can be understood that the readers of Pak Rajeshwar were mostly Hindus who were not very accustomed to having garlic and onion in their food as yet. Another section contained recipes on wheat products, which were absent in later recipe books that I have looked at. Pak Prabandho, which came out in 1879, was quite different from the earlier 2 books in the sense that it incorporated garlic and onion in its recipes. Increase in the uses of onion and garlic for recipes supposedly written for the Bengali upper caste but also middle class Hindus already began to show changes in dietary patterns among the middle classes in colonial Bengal from, I would say, late 19th century. And as I already said, that the first most popular Bengali cookbook was Biprodash Mukhopadhyay's Shokhin Khadyo Pak, which came out around 1889. He later compiled many of his writings on food together into a volume, into a single volume, which was also called Pak Pranali. A thorough discussion of both Mukhopadhyay's and Progya Sundari Devi's cookbooks is called for in order to understand how hybridity forms the crux of the development of Bengali cuisine. Both Mukhopadhyay's and Progya Sundari's cookbooks are classic examples of the changing diet of the Bengalis. The vegetable recipes that Mukhopadhyay described were mostly made from vegetables already available in India. However, he did have recipes on cabbage and cauliflower, which were new vegetables. And since cabbage was a new vegetable, what we see is that Mukhopadhyay first, has this section where he's introducing what cabbage is to his readers. He kind of describes what it is, how many types of cabbages are there, what are its nutritional benefits, etc. Because he's trying to say he's talking about different categories like drumhead cabbage and sugarloaf cabbage, which are in fact something I had never heard of before I actually read the book. One can also know from Pak Pranali that cabbage seeds were brought into India every year from abroad. A detailed discussion of how to choose and clean a cabbage preceded the recipes in the first volume of Pak Pranali, the periodical. This discussion obviously became imperative since it was a new vegetable. In the periodical as well as the cookbook, so-called Bengali recipes happily coexisted with new recipes, which range from, what Mukhopadhyay would call British cuisine or French recipes or Italian recipes. Like, there would be these are the names that we find in the book, like Jewish fried fish, Italian mutton, mutton French cutlet, English chop, plum pudding, ginger pudding, hasty pudding, orange jelly, Irish stew, orange custard, and the like. What has to be noted in this context is that the naming, which is very interesting, that nomenclature itself was becoming hybrid. For example, Mukhopadhyay had recipes for English bhuni khichuri and English sheikh kebab. And this is something unique. And this is, also to be noted that, when the British first came to India, after a while, they also, in the memoirs, you would find that they came to thoroughly enjoy khichdi or khichuri, which is very different from kejri, by the way. Mukhopadhyay went one step further and gave an English flavor to an Indian dish, which is English bhuni khichuri. It's a very interesting recipe. So it was basically a constant process of hybridization where both the British elements as well as the Indian elements were present. And this is most evident, this play with naming, in both Mukhopadhyay and Progashindori's use of the term curry. The term curry, which was often an English innovation for Indian recipe of a mixture of spices, found place in Pak Pranali. We get to know about recipes such as lamb curry, egg curry, prawn curry, and also English rohu fish curry in Mukhopadhyay's cookbook. He liberally used onion and garlic in these recipes. But for Mukhopadhyay, curry had an entirely different definition, quite different from what the British cookbook writers had to say. Mukhopadhyay defined curry thus, I'm just quoting him, Europeans learned to cook curry from the Jews, and the Jews learnt it from the Muslims. When Mukhopadhyay gave recipes for curry, he was quite emphatic that this had no Indianness to it. Remember, when he says Indianness, he also implies Hindu. So he's emphatic that he was either following the Muslims or the English. He did not consider curry to be a Hindu dish, and that's why he always puts it within quotes when he writes curry. He wrote that the English did not use ground spices in their curry and invented something called the Calcutta curry powder. Calcutta curry powder was made of a mixture of 1 tablespoon poppy seeds, 1 tablespoon turmeric powder, half teaspoon red chili powder, half teaspoon cumin, and 1 teaspoon salt. Lizzie Collingham has argued that curry was created for the British in India. Her interpretation of curry is of course drawn from her readings of Anglo-Indian memoirs and cookbooks. However, it seems from Mukhopadhyay's account that the colonized were eager to erase all connections with curry. Hence, Mukhopadhyay connected curry to a different trajectory. Although Progashundari was not so emphatic about severing ties with curry, she hardly used the English formulaic recipe, which I just said, for curry, which was generally made out of a hodgepodge of spices. Kiran Lekha Rai, another cookbook writer, whose book Jol Khabar came out much later in 1924, showed similar tendencies in writing recipes. Her recipes are also, very much like Mukhopadhyay's and Progashundari's, which included recipes from other regions of India. A significant feature of her cookbook was that whenever she wrote down a recipe which did not have an Indian name, she put the word in English script next to the Bengali script within parentheses. So, for example, if she wrote omelette in Bengali, it would always be followed by the word omelette in English within parentheses. And these included a number of words like ice cream custard, cake cream, apple charlotte, apple jelly, apple mincemeat, potato mince pie, Worcestershire sauce, egg snow, cottage pie, marmalade, pudding, trifle, cutlet, custard, Christmas cake, Christmas pudding, chocolate eclairs, grilled chicken, chicken hot pot, cheese fritters, jam tart, tapioca cream, and the like. Similarly, when Ray used highly technical terms such as crystallization, fermentation, she preferred to write it in English instead of Bengali, although the book is in Bengali. Ray made a distinction between what was not indigenous, what was foreign, and what was not, by her emphasis on the use of language. However, she showed considerable courage in making so-called traditional recipes foreign. Although Sharat Chandra Rai, here I think I should give an introduction here of Sharat Chandra Rai. He's Kiran Lekha's husband. He was a landlord in northern Bengal, mainly what would today be the Rajshahi region. He was a member of Varendra Cultural Society who took an active interest in promoting the regional history of Varendra Bhumi, which is again roughly northern Bengal. And he actually encouraged Kiran Lekha to write a food history of the region, Borendra Randhon, which was also part of the history of that project. Okay. So, Kiran Lekha's husband, Sharat Chandra Rai, he wrote an introduction to her cookbook where he said that the recipes for, yogurt or shandesh that were given by Kiran Lekha were authentic recipes of Borendra Bhumi or northern Bengal. But what is interesting, if you look at the recipes themselves, Kiran Lekha, when she's making this particular whatever shandesh of Borendra Bhumi, she's putting vanilla essence and strawberry essences in these preparations, right? So basically Shondesh, which is something claimed to be very authentic Bengali by Rai, her husband. Also, and this is something Nilanjanda will speak on in much more detail, actually was made from chana or cottage cheese, which is of course not indigenous to Bengal, right? Okay. So if I again go back to curry and Mukhopadhyay and Prokashundari. So in Prokashundari's book, you will find different recipes for curry. And these recipes, interestingly, were applied to quintessentially Bengali vegetables like echor and mocha and fish like khilsa and pashe. And she used different spices for each recipe of curry. Her play with name in this context again is very noteworthy. She named one dish Firingi, by which she meant Anglo-Indian, Firingi curry. Even though what is she using for the recipe? Potol or wax goat, which was very native to Bengal. So neither Firingi nor curry, can either be called British or Bengali. It's basically hybrid. All the Mukhopadhyay claim that curry did not originate in India and hence cannot exactly be called an Indian dish. Again, he's equating India with the Hindus here. He was not necessarily writing under the pretense of making a so-called authentic and indigenous cuisine. Apart from a large number of Mughlai recipes, still without onion and garlic by the way, Mukhopadhyay's book had a number of recipes from other regions of India. He stated that yellow lentils grew better in northern India rather than in Bengal. Hence, it tasted better if cooked in a Hindustani way. By Hindustani, it's kind of a sort of generic term for anything that is not Bengali. In its recipe, Mukhopadhyay incorporated asafoetida, which was not used frequently in Bengali cuisine as yet. Similarly, he included recipes for Kashmiri lentils and Gujarati dishes in his cookbook. Nowhere in the book, he pretended that he was venturing to construct a national cuisine. He never tried to find a connection between different categories of cuisine that he had in his recipe book. It seems that he was writing for sheer gastronomic pleasure. Another book, and this is, published much later, post-independence, called Randhon Sanket. This was written by Binapani Mitra. In her introduction to the book, she claimed that she had actually written these recipes much earlier, but she did not publish them. And she did not obviously have a very lengthy discussion on curry like Mukhopadhyay did, but it seems that Mitra also did not consider curry itself to be Indian. It also needs to be mentioned that Mitra had curry recipes for fish like koi, which is again, very kind of unique to Bengal. However, Mitra's koi curry did not contain the curry powder that you would find in the cuisine, the Anglo-Indian cuisine. By Anglo-Indian, what I mean here is the Europeans residing in India in colonial period. She simply used ground onion, ginger, turmeric, and clarified butter to make the koi curry. But she's quite indifferent to the purity of food. And she also had, kind of recipes for hybrid food like kheer toffee, like thickened milk toffee. So, hybridity became a frequent occurrence in the recipes we find in most of the Bengali periodicals around this time. For example, a mutton chop recipe or a potato stew recipe contained ingredients like ghee, or clarified butter. While the periodical Poricharika came with a recipe for muffin, which was made of potato, again potato and potol, a very strange combination. The question arises, if the ingredients, so what were, and what about these ingredients? What were they thinking about it, the cookbook writers? Basically, it seems that, they're not really bothered about keeping this so-called purity of the food intact. And they're using several new stuff that was becoming available in the market, like canned fruits, several types of essence, like Binapani Mitra did, gelatin, even gelatin for her recipes. Kiran Lekha, in fact, taught techniques of preserving or canning fruits, such as strawberries, apples, and peaches at home. And she also used new utensils like cake mold, pie dish, and patty pan. The availability of different foreign food had become so enormous that it was easily possible for an upper middle class family to afford them. But this consumption of something which was not indigenous, something which was foreign, also had, it contained this potential threat of adapting something which was alien, at least for some. And so the alien had to be localized by indigenizing what was not new, what was foreign. And so this so-called modern food preparations produced through an amalgamation of the alien and the indigenous came to be called authentic. How? Drawing references, or rather by constructing a particular Vedic tradition. Both Pragya Sundari and another person who has also written extensively in the 19th century, Ritendranath Thakur, contributed to the making of this Vedic tradition. Both of them, what they're doing are they're making several interesting observations about naming. Hybridity of naming. Pragya Sundari, of course, in a cookbook, and Ritendranath Thakur in his Mudid Dokan. The book was called Mudid Dokan. And he talks about hybridity of cuisine. But obviously, 2 points need to be noted here. Of course, Ritendranath did not use the term hybridity. This is something I am using here. The term that he would use in Bengali, what would be samajik melamesha, or social interaction. And secondly, what he argued was that this social interaction had always existed from ancient times, from Vedic times. According to Tagore, again I'm quoting him, just like the Europeans are adopting our rice these days, European food like chop cutlets have become ghoroa, that is quotidian amongst us. What is significant here is that, the concept of hybridity overlapped with authenticity in this context. And both Ritendranath Thakur and Pragya Sundari Devi, what they're arguing is that several European food actually derive their name from Indian ones. And so in that sense, European food has always been hybrid. So for example, especially Ritendranath had this elaborate argument on such naming. For instance, he argued that most European food, like pies and pancakes, derive their names from Sanskrit. He would say that poop, the Sanskrit word or dhatu, poop, and pie belong to the same genre of food. Since the Vedic poop, this was his argument, he says the Vedic word or dhatu poop had been converted into pua in Bengali. So it is not totally improbable that poop was distorted to become pie in English. And he was here, drawing comparisons between pie and malpua. He further argued that the term pastry derived from the Sanskrit word pishtok. So Tagore, what he was trying to argue that, basically English had always borrowed from the Indians. It's not the other way around. And he also argued that even bread, which constituted one of the staples of the English, was not their own. I'm reading this out, this passage from his book, because this is rather interesting. The word bread came from bhrashtra, B-H-R-A-S-T-R-A, bhrashtra, which means a pan for frying bread. Bhrat, B-H-R-A-T-H. Bhrat came from bhrashtra, just like Maratha is derived from Maharashtra. And bhrat became brot, B-R-O-T, brot in German, and consequently bread in English. Something which is bhrashtra, that is something that can be fried in a pan, is bread. At first, Europeans were satisfied with the bread. These days, they're fattened with our rice and lentils. But even this seems trivial when I see that they have always enriched their country since ancient times by borrowing terminology and knowledge from the gigantic store of knowledge in India. And Progashundari also stated something similar, that, for example, both the Bengali word bhaji and the English word fry originated from the Sanskrit dhatu or etymon bhrij, B-H-R-I-J, bhrij, which meant cooking. So basically what they're trying to argue here, both Ritendranath and Progashundari, was new had its origins in the Aryan tradition. They argued that whatever modern India consumed as a concoction of the East and the West was actually a product of a Vedic tradition. In that sense, European cuisine had always been hybrid. There was no purity in European cuisine. Aryan languages were transformed into Sanskrit during the Vedic period and had enormous influence on several modern civilizations. Obviously, Ritendranath Tagore was deeply, indebted to works of British Orientalists here like Sir William Jones, who had grouped languages like Sanskrit, Greek, Latin, Gothic, Celtic, and Old Persian together, calling them the descendant languages from Proto-Indo-European language. And Jones had further added the idea that Sanskrit literature was a repository of the most ancient written records of Indo-European languages. Obviously, what Ritendranath is arguing here is completely conjectural and often verged on intense romanticization of Indian tradition. But what is, the point is that new food, new patterns, new sources of supply in the market were becoming relevant in the lives of people. So, before I conclude, today actually we are here to celebrate World Heritage Week, and ideally I should have spoken about food that retains innate traditions of Indianness. But I actually did quite the contrary, because I seriously don't believe there is anything like that. And what I've tried to argue in this paper, that often what is known as tradition is a product of modernity. in contemporary world, experience shows that contrary to what has been described as a complete McDonaldization, or what is also these days loosely defined as globalization, there is always an attempt to make the foreign or the new familiar through creative responses. While these experiments with globalization are often perceived as contemporary phenomenon, such creativity, such creative responses were not altogether absent in colonial societies. The colony often came up with such very creative and imaginative responses that would have tremendous impact on the metropole. And here, rather than what I was thinking about is rather than trying to argue that, there was indeed something pure or there was a Vedic tradition or what I tried to bring your attention to was, this kind of constant negotiations with what was new. The pure is never pure. It's rather, a way of negotiating with the new. And so the end product was a hybrid cuisine, which was obviously cast in an idiom of authenticity and a specifically modern understanding of the traditional. Thank you.
Thank you so much, madam. So we'll move on to the next lecture and we'll take the questions at the end so that we are able to keep time. So I welcome our next speaker, Mr. Nilanjan Hazra, who's going to speak to us about gastronativism and the curious case of Chanar Dalna. A brief intro to Mr. Hazra. He is a poet, translator, essayist, has 3 abiding passions: Urdu poetry, culinary history, and history of frontier America. He writes in Bangla and has written over 15 published books of his own poems, histories of khichdi and kebab, and translations of postmodern Pakistani Urdu poetry, Palestinian poetry, and 19th century memoirs of frontier America. In 2018, he received the prestigious Leela Roy Award from the West Bengal Sahitya Academy for his contribution to Bengali literature through translations. Professionally, he has been the electronic media chief of US Consulate in Kolkata for 15 years and a senior assistant editor in the Times of India group for about a decade. Very warm welcome, sir.
You can hear me? Thank you very much. Good evening. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I was surprised when Mr. G.M. Kapoor of INTACH proposed that I be part of this panel. And even more surprised when the Victoria Memorial Hall agreed to it. I simply have no claim to be here. I love to eat. I love to cook even more. My only stress buster. I have a corporate job which is very stressful. And once in a while, when I come across a curious recipe, I try to dig into its history a little. That's all. All that I will present here is based on such experiences. Unlike Professor Ray, I am not used to delivering lectures. So I have written down everything I wish to say. I will, over the next 30 minutes or so, read that out along with a basic slide presentation I have prepared so that I could at least hold some of your attention. Now, to begin with, let me give a little bit of synopsis in one paragraph of what I will say in this paper. It's not a paper really, it's nothing. Over the past few decades, the culinary imagination of communities across the world has been deeply influenced by a call to return to the roots. Academics have termed this as gastro-nationalism. and gastronativism, title of my talk. Mostly this has been in response to disruptions caused by globalizations, seeking to resist the perceived influence of the intruding other on authentic local cultures. Such gastronationalism often, sometimes even unwittingly, fits into the larger politico-cultural projects of the globally emerging political right. This article puts the lens on such gastronativism by deconstructing, quote, a typical Bengali curry, unquote, named Chanar Dalna. Gastronationalism is one of the most recent postulates in the field of academic culinary discourse. It was used for the first time in print as recently as 2010 by American sociologist Michaela DeSoucy. Through this term, she has sought to, quote, analyze, one, the ways in which food production, distribution, and consumption can demarcate and sustain the emotive power of national attachment, and two, how nationalist sentiments in turn can shape the production and marketing of food. The multi-methodological analysis reveal how the construct of gastronationalism can help us better understand pan-national tensions in symbolic boundary politics, politics that protect certain foods and industries as representative of national cultural traditions, unquote. She goes on to add, quote, contemporary food politics, beyond the insights it affords into symbolic boundary politics, speaks to several arenas of sociological interest, including markets, identity politics, authenticity, I underline these two particularly, identity politics, authenticity, and culture, and the complexities of globalization, unquote. New York University professor Fabio Persecoli, through his research, has sharpened the term further and has arrived at gastronativism. In 2022, he published his book titled Gastronativism, Food, Identity, Politics. Tracing his thoughts behind the formulation of the concept of gastronativism, Professor Persecoli writes about his experience in a conference in Italy in 2019. The title of the conference was Cucina Politica. In Italian, it may mean both political food or political kitchen. Professor Persecoli goes on to write, I quote, among the conversations that took place over the coffee breaks during the meeting, one stuck with me. Some of the participants observed that the Italian left, that is the political left, seems to have lost its capacity to relate effectively to politically charged ideas like nation or patriotism, which in that country have become the almost exclusive domain of right-wing and conservative discourse. That exchange got me thinking as it became apparent that the phenomenon was not limited to Italy, unquote. That thinking, followed by meticulous research, led him to obtain a larger picture of how food was being increasingly and aggressively used to symbolize identity politics. The restriction on beef in keeping with Hindu upper caste sensitivities, the divorcing of pork from lasagna to come up with the halal lasagna for devout Muslims. AfD party's popular posters in Germany saying, Islam, it doesn't match with our kitchen. Posters of Italy's Liga Nord party screaming, yes to polenta, no to couscous. The latter obviously turned into a symbol of North African immigrants. France's Nisa Khabela group's slogan, yes to soca, no to kebab. Soca being a local chickpea flour flatbread. One could go on and on. In 2018, I had written a book named Kebab Kissa, a wireframe of sorts of the global history of kebabs. In it, one chapter was titled Kebaber Rajniti, the politics of kebabs, as kebab is pronounced in Turkey. Here I had used a collage of photographs showing German Chancellor Angela Merkel, and he was not a leftist, he was quite a conservative person, who took one of the boldest and most unequivocal positions, resisting the violent right-wing rage that was sweeping Germany against Muslim Turkish immigrants in the second decade of the 21st century. As you can see, I think you can see there, right? Chancellor Merkel chose doner kebab to get the message out loud and clear where her government stood on the issue. No doubt, this has been largely a fallout of the socio-economic disruptions and hardships caused by what has been loosely termed as globalization in the second half of the 20th century. Writes Persecuoli, quote, "In these and other instances, food stands for a variety of forces ranging from migrants and internal countercultural agitators, often depicted as foreign agents or dupes of external enemies, to cosmopolitan globalists, financial elites, and transnational corporations, all bent on poisoning the minds and bodies of good people. Local, communal, ethnic, and traditional food practices become a catalyst for the resistance against external infiltrations of power grabs, wherever their source may be." It is not difficult to note that, not unlike nationalism itself, against the virulent form of which Rabindranath Tagore never tired of warning us, the charged emotions of gastro-nationalism and gastronativism have very often been used by the political right to whip up a violent populism masquerading as people's movement. As globalization and neoliberalism have transformed food systems, people have responded by seeking to return to their roots. Many have embraced local ingredients and notions of cultural heritage, often without realizing that this impulse can play into the hands of nationalist and xenophobic political projects. Such movements draw on the strong emotions connected with eating to stoke resentment and contempt for the peoples and the cultures which are conceived as the other. I am not an academician. I am merely a deeply interested observer of diverse culinary cultures and practices. I love food, I love to cook, as I said. That's all. It's not my position to theorize my experiences. Hence, at this point, I shall depart the dense realm of theory and enter into the more lucid world of my experiences. Through such personal experiences, I couldn't but notice an increasing trend in our own Indian, even Bengali, non-academic culinary discourse, a strange nostalgic longing for pure and the authentic local cuisine, a cuisine that apparently typically populated the culinary knowledge of the matriarch of the bygone era, the proverbial Ma Thamma Dimmar Ranna. It is often presumed that a whole body of undefined knowledge has been swept away by an undefined storm of intruding culture. During personal conversations, I have noticed that this matriarch is not defined by any time period. The laments come from all ages, from 60 to 20, perhaps even younger. Of course, this largely is middle class and upper middle class sentiment. I may even risk marking it as a sentiment of the nouveau riche. But in absolute terms, in our country, that number is not small. Indeed, it is large enough to emerge as a marketing tool randomly used by food product sellers, ranging from transnational corporations, restaurant chains, mushrooming NGOs operating in local communities, dealing in heritage food. This narrative also curiously fits into the lost golden era myth of most right-wing philosophies. I do not have the expertise and the knowledge to present here a theoretical busting of such myths. However, as a hands-on cook and an attentive student of history, I intend to present here the story of one food item, a dish, which any Bengali would not hesitate to most emphatically claim as Amader Pod, our cuisine, Chanar Dalna. Ask the Mr. Know-all AI of Google and he will promptly tell you, yes, Chana Dalna is a classic Bengali food. It is also interesting to note that the name can't be translated into English. At least I couldn't find out an English for Dalna. Go a step further into the Government of India's portal Indian Culture and here's what you will learn. Quote, this is a typical Bengali curry that consists of chana or paneer. Is chana paneer really? Chana or paneer nuggets in a light tomato gravy, unquote. Unlike our beloved Rasgulla, the Bengaliness of Chana Dalna has never been contested, to the best of my knowledge. Now let's look into the fascinating construction of this, quote, typical Bengali curry, ignoring for a moment that the word curry comes from the Tamil curry via the British. But then that's just a description. That's not the food. So let's turn to the food. The first written recipe of chana dalna that I have been able to locate is from 1884 in the first volume of Pak Pranali, India's first culinary magazine edited by the great Biprodash Mukherjee, whose role in diversifying the upper class Bengali platter is historic. The first volume of Pak Pranali curiously spells the word dalna as dalna. The name you can see is Shoho Chalar Dalna. The ingredients of this easy dish are as follows: chana, ghee, sugar, Indian bay leaf, coriander seed, ginger, cumin seed, black pepper, cinnamon, cloves, salt, and water. I intend to pass these through the lens of history, sieving out the myths. Not all of them, but some of the key ones. Let's put the lens first on the most important ingredient, chana. Immediately, I am transported to a good 400 years ago. Let's take the call then. Immediately, I am transported to a good 400 years ago, 1641, a lovely winter afternoon in Lahore. Emperor Shah Jahan's birthday on January 5th has just been celebrated with befitting razzmatazz and pomp. His father-in-law, the father of his beloved and untimely deceased queen, Arjumand Banu Begum, also known as Mumtaz Mahal, Abul Hasan Asaf Khan, being the Subedar of Lahore, has thrown a luncheon banquet for the emperor and his entire family. As history designed it, this banquet had two secret witnesses. A Portuguese Augustinian priest, Fray Sebastian Manrique, and his landlord in Lahore, also a priest, also Portuguese, one Father Crasto. These two priests, for reasons best known to them, threw all caution to the winds and, using the permission they had obtained to enter into Asaf Khan's palace, hid themselves with the help of a eunuch guard in a balcony which had a clear view and was within the clear hearing distance of the dining hall. They watched the whole imperial family, including the ladies, dine, an offense that, if caught, would have drawn only one punishment: summary execution. What did the royal family eat? Unfortunately, these deeply racist Europeans were so dazzled by the ambience of the dining hall and the elaborate service that Manrik, in his memoir, has spent the whole chapter describing those. Of food, we get just these sentences. I quote, "I was astonished and surprised to see so much polite usage and good order in practice amongst such barbarians," meaning Indians. "While I was not less astonished at the abundance and diversity of the dishes and eatables, among which some were in European style, especially certain pastries, cakes, and other sweet confections made by some slaves who had been with the Portuguese at Ugulim. These," obviously Manrik is talking of the sweets here, "were so admirably and delicately made that the emperor was surprised at such novelties." The quote is continuing actually. "And he asked his father-in-law who made such excellent sweets. When he said they had been made by certain Franguinese," that is Portuguese, the emperor said, raising his voice as if in astonishment, "In truth, the Franks would have been a great people, but for their having three most evil characters. First, they are kafirs, that is, they have no religion. Secondly, they eat pork. And thirdly, they do not wash that part of the body from which replete nature expels the superfluities of their corporeal bellies." Unquote. So we just know that the emperor was bowled by the sweets made by the slaves trained by the Portuguese in Ugulim. What sweets were those? Well, Ugulim is today's Hooghly in West Bengal, and we know for certain that this lunch was held soon after Shah Jahan's birthday, January the 5th. Winter. Was the emperor served Hooghly's legendary Nolengurer Sandesh? I don't know. We don't have any evidence. But we also know that there is an agreement among scholars regarding Bengalis learning to curdle milk to make chana from the Portuguese. Allured by the wealth of Hindustan, the greedy Portuguese sailor Vasco da Gama arrived at Kochi, Calicut in 1499 from distant Lisboa. Even before half a century had rolled by, Portuguese war fleets landed in our own Bengal, took control of the Porto Grande de Bengala, the Mughal Bengal's largest port, Chattogram, and the smaller Porto Pequeno of Shoptogram. Soon they headed north, and with the blessings of Empire Akbar the Great, one Captain Pedro Tavares established a small Portuguese settlement, Ugulim, on the Hooghly River in 1579, or thereabout. By the middle of the 16th century, Bengal's tryst with the Portuguese colonialists was fairly deep. No one exactly knows when, but it must have been during this period that we Bengalis had not only picked up, but had also mastered the culinary epoch-making art of preparing chana. If we look up the entry of chana, or chena in Bongio Shabdakosh, the Bengali dictionary of the venerable lexicographer Horicharan Bandopadhyay, we will notice that the earliest reference of the word chana or chena in Bengali literature that he has provided is in Ko Cho or Kobikonkon Chondi, that is Mukundaram Chakraborty's famous Chondi Mangala. What a stunning description of the 16th century bazaar in Bengal. Scholar Shukumar Sen has dated this work to 1544. It is curious to note how the dates match. So, the prime ingredient of chana dalna irrefutably has a strong Portuguese flavor. The next three ingredients in Bipradasha's list, ghee, sugar, that is sharkara in Sanskrit, and tejopatro, that is Indian bay leaf, were available in Bengal for more than 2 millennia. But what about coriander, our beloved dhone or dhania? We hear celeb chef Ranveer Brar, and the words of celeb chefs is Bible these days. telling the BBC that this love for dhania has led him to start a petition campaign demanding that dhania be declared the national herb of India. I have no problem with that. But in the same breath, I must also underline, far away from India, the credit for the use of coriander to spice our food must go to the ancient Romans. While ancient Egyptians certainly grew coriander, Oxford's wonderful collection titled Food on the Move tells us poppy, celery, coriander, and dill, quote, all these spices were much used as flavorings in Roman cookery, unquote. So did the Greeks. Indeed, tablets from a Mycenaean palace dating back to 1300 BCE during the Trojan War have entries for coriadana, from which is the word coriander derived. It is believed that the Macedonian army introduced Brar's national herb of India to India after Alexander's invasion in 327 BCE. Jack Turner, in his book Spice, the History of a Temptation, reminds us, quote, so thoroughly implanted is the sense of the otherness of spices that native Mediterranean aromatics such as cumin, coriander, saffron, and fennel have come to be associated more with the cuisine of the countries that adopted them than with the lands of their origin. A reminder, this is very important, a reminder that the cultural traffic had traveled along the spice routes went both ways. Cumin. The Bengali word jire or jira is derived from the Persian zire. Cuminum cymium, once again an East Mediterranean plant, once again a beloved spice of the ancient Romans, so much so that way back in the 1st century CE, we hear Roman author, scientist, and military commander Pliny the Elder's culinary advice, quote, when one is tired of all seasonings, cumin remains welcome, unquote. India, of course, have been blessed with blessed for millennia with aromas of black pepper and cardamom, but not in Bengal. The same Pliny the Elder, in his magnum opus, Natural History, was furious with Roman traders who, he thought, wasted precious national treasure by importing shiploads of useless round black seeds, black pepper. These Roman corbitas were mostly sailing from the grand port of Muziris on the Malabar coast. The Bengal's Tamrolipti was primarily exporting cotton and silk textiles. The stunningly picturesque Yelemala in the Western Ghats translates into English as cardamom hills. For the fragrance of cloves, chefs of the world must pay their homage to the tiny lush green dots in the azure Banda Sea, known as the Maluku Islands of Indonesia. অতি দূর সমুদ্রের পর হাল ভেঙে যে নাবিক হারায়েছে দিশা, সবুজ ঘাসের দেশ যখন সে চোখে দেখে, দারুচিনি দ্বীপের ভিতর তেমনি দেখেছি তারে অন্ধকারে. No Bengali worth his or her salt is unfamiliar with these lines of our great poet. I have not the power to translate these into English poetry, but a rough prose translation would be something like this. When, after voyaging through a distant sea, the sailor with broken oars, who has lost his way, watches lush grasslands on the Cinnamon Island, so have I beheld her in the dark, unquote. This Cinnamon Island of Jivanananda Das could be along the Sri Lankan, the Malabar, even the Myanmar coastline, but certainly nowhere near Bengal. We never grew cinnamon, we still don't. Now let's pause for a moment and ask ourselves, are we still eating the same chana dalna that the great modernizer of Bengali cuisine had presented to us in 1884? Of course not. Taking a snatch from the Greek philosopher Heraclitus, the contemporary of Gautama the Buddha, I, for one, never tire of saying that all cuisine is in a state of constant flux. Let us travel barely 20 years to 1903 and look up the recipe of chana dalna coming straight from the hearth of the Bengal Renaissance. Should we, of course, accept that there was indeed such a socio-cultural movement? Many historians don't accept Bengal Renaissance. In 1903, Pragya Sundari Devi, Debendranath Tagore's granddaughter and Rabindranath's niece, published the 2-volume of her hugely popular cookbook Amish o Niramish Ahar. Professor Rai has talked about this. Non-vegetarian and vegetarian food. It features chana dalna. We note how significantly the recipe of the same dish has changed in the same North Kolkata within 2 decades. I underline the 2 most significant changes: ingredients which arrived from Europe and changed the taste of food in India forever. Chilies. The Tagore family wanted them in both forms in their chana dalna, green and dried red, shukno lanka. The same European colonizers who taught us to curdle milk into chana brought chilies as well from distant southern America in the late 15th and early 16th century. Interestingly, even though ingredients arrived at the imperial kitchen of the great Mughals from all corners of India and even from neighboring countries, the Mughal imperial chefs resisted chilies for 2 long centuries with disdain. Clearly not so the Bengali families that hobnobbed with the sahibs of the British company Bahadur in search of dubious wealth. The Tagorean chana dalna, therefore, forsook the subtle pungency of the black pepper, preferring a sharper and deeper green and red chilies. And there is more. The outward-looking English-educated modern ladies of the Tagore family also couldn't dismiss the all-purpose potato. How could they? As Professor Utsa Ray has shown in her vastly researched book, Culinary Culture in Colonial India, even though brought to Hindustan by the Portuguese and the Dutch traders in the 17th century, the vegetable had few takers here until the British India Company presented it before the Bengalis as a symbol of culinary progress almost at the end of the 19th century. Potato was embraced by the Bengali hoity-toity as modernity. We arrived at the modern chana dalna. But be with me a little longer. It's time to move to the digital era. We take quite a jump. One of the most popular Bengali recipe vlogs that I notice is Hangla Heshel. On YouTube, the vlog has 260,000 subscribers. On April 27, 2020, they uploaded a recipe, Niramish Chanar Dalna. We notice the arrival of tomato. It arrives once again from Southern America, arrives once again with the Portuguese in the mid-16th century, and yet again it's for the British to popularize it in India and particularly in Bengal. One of the finest scholars of Mughal and late Mughal gastronomy, Divya Narayan, tells us that the earliest reference to tomato which she could locate is an Indian cookbook named Nuskhai Nimat Khan, published in 1801. Curiously, it is a Persian translation of an English cookbook. One Sheikh Hakha Gafrullah of Muzaffarpur was the translator. The stated purpose of the cookbook was to make English food popular among the Indian gentlemanly class who were so eager to please the British. And it contains a recipe titled Tarkibi Tomata Soup Yani Shorbai Vilaiti Bagan. It took another good 88 years before George Watt could write in his Dictionary of the Economic Products in India about tomato. Quote, natives are beginning to appreciate the food, but the plant is chiefly cultivated for the European population. Bengalis and Burmans use it in their sour curries. Unquote. I come from the millennium-old terracotta temple town of Bishnupur. In that small Mufassil town cushioned within the dense forests, till as late as the mid-1970s, vegetable vendors who brought to the bazaar a few yellowish, deformed fruits would be stunned if you asked them the price of tomatoes. They knew it by only one name, Bilati. Thus, ladies and gentlemen, we now have a wonderfully pure and authentic Bengali food named chanar dalna. Am I contesting its Bengaliness? Of course not. But now that gastro-nationalism and gastro-nativism are conspicuously populating our culinary imagination, I only wish to underline how the authentic local is densely populated with the other. I only wish to remind ourselves how the Portugueseness and the Romanness and the Greekness and the South Americanness and the South Asianness and the East Asianness and the South Indianness and albeit the Britishness are all contained within that authentic Bengaliness. Thank you.
Are you taking questions?
Yes, we'll take the questions now.
So I have a two-part question for Mr. Hazra. How about chana? Why do we say it is of Portuguese influence? As we see in Bongiya Shabdakosh also, it could be from the word chinno in Sanskrit. Dudh kete jawa, chhide jawa, we say that. That's one part. I would like to know your view on this. And B, on the same note, how about shukto? Nowadays we hear that this is also of Portuguese descent. Could you throw some light on that, please?
Yes. As for chana, there is almost a complete agreement among scholars who have worked on this that there is no reference of curdled milk in any Indian literature or food literature, Indian food literature, anywhere of that kind of food. As for chinno, chana coming from chinno, that's only a name. When the Bengalis were naming the food, they got it because they were chinnoing the food, they call it chana. And I remember that Professor Romila Thapa, when I was a student, had reminded. Sorry about that. So I remember that Professor Romila Thapa had warned us that etymological similarities and deriving conclusions out of, historical conclusions out of those could lead to disastrous results. The Pitori Matori, Peter Matter, Father Mother example she gave us and all that. So I sort of, that's the first part of your answer. Shukto, I am told, I have not looked into it, and unlike her, I am not an academician. I just cook and eat. So, but shukto, I understand the Portuguese, it was very heavily influenced from the Portuguese bitter curry that kind of they were preparing. Before that, there is no such evidence of Bengalis having such a concoction of a bitter introductory, food. That's my very, very limited knowledge on shukto. Would you want to?
No, it's fine.
We'll take a question after.
Just a matter of curiosity, I remember in my childhood hearing the term biliti begun for tomato. Now you did mention biliti, but this conjunction of biliti begun, could you throw any light on that? Why begun for tomato? Why was it biliti begun?
I think the plant is of the same genre or something, the tomato and the eggplant. And also, yes, in Bakura, from where I come from, they promptly left out the begun. They just called it bilati.
This is a question for Professor Utsa Ray. You talked about the influence or the confluence, more or less, of British, English cuisine with Bengali cuisine, and how the local cuisine accepted the English cuisine and sort of localized it. There has been an influence of other types of cuisine also, like Awadhi cuisine. Do you have any examples of any indigenization or not indigenization, Bengalization of Awadhi cuisine?
Aloo in biryani, of course. And yes, of course. But if you see, first, I wouldn't say Awadhi. Awadhi comes obviously much later. At first, the kind of cookbooks that both Nilanjan and I talked about, like Biprodash or Proga Shundari, when they were writing, you do not exactly get any specifies, right? Do you get actually Awadhi? What they say is Mughlai, right? More Mughal, but not Awadhi, isn't it? Yeah. So I wouldn't say that you do see anything like that, but there is, of course, influence of Awadhi cuisine much later. And that also, in many senses is also indebted to, Wazir Ali Shah being here and the later influences, of course. But not exactly, I wouldn't say very specifically Awadhi in late 19th or early 20th centuries. This is at least among the middle classes. Of course there was, because after all, how would you explain this? But this much more in pockets rather than in cookbooks, because most of the cookbooks, after all, were being written by the Bengali cookbooks were being written by the Hindu middle classes. And so even when there are references to what I just said, quote unquote, Mughal or Mughlai cuisine, that also would have very distinct flavors or tenors, like, cutting out onion or garlic. And in fact, I have read translations of Nyamatnama where, the recipes are very different from what you actually read in Biprodash, even not just Biprodash, even the cookbooks I talked about, like Bakrajeshwar and Banjan Ratnakar. But Awadhi, I think, it was more pocket oriented in some places and not so much amongst the middle classes. Even if you talked about, the Europeans residing, say, for in Bengal, the Bawarchi influence, I don't think I have specifically seen anything like that. And there you actually have the mistresses of the house telling them to, tone it down, put in that, put in this. So that was, I don't want to use the word, a kind of Europeanization again. So it's a constant, and I completely agree with the Nilanjan that it's a, constant process of where everything is corrupted, if I use the word. There is no purity in either the kind of cuisine you find in the Europeans residing in Calcutta, or even the British who resides in Britain, or in the food of the Bengal. It was very, very fractured, very fractured.
But when do you see the kebab culture coming in? I mean, like, was it there during the British times? And
there are references. There are, of course,
but
references.
They call it Mughal, I suppose.
There are, of course, references, but it's called Mughal. It's not called Awadhi. I haven't seen the term. Have you?
I would like to add
Yes.
to this. The one that comes to mind very easily is there is this amazing film, Shotti Holeo Golpo. Golpo Holeo Shotti, I'm sorry. This is what happens when you become old. So anyway, so when Robi Ghosh appears, he's asked what he can cook. And you will see he like narrates a whole lot of very quickly dishes. And one of them, if I remember correctly, is kurma. And he said he can cook very well Bengali food. And how kurma has been, sort of indigenized, internalized by the Bengalis. Now I have couple of what I would call very, scholars have generally agreed that they are okay. Nuskai Shahjahani, I have a Persian copy of, and Alwan-e-Nimat, with the first volume of which is irrefutably Aurangzeb's Imperial Kitchen. It's in Urdu. It's actually, I have a Urdu translation of the Persian one. Nowhere is there any kurma. Kurma you will find in Awadh. It comes later. And I would imagine it comes from the Turco-Persian influence rather than the Mughal influence directly. And the other thing that I just wanted to say passingly is the putting of potato into biryani in Kolkata has nothing to do, or at least there is not an iota of evidence that Wajid Ali Shah put it. I mean, it would be an affront. He was a great man. He has many things to praise. Let us not put the burden of potatoes on his shoulder. Nothing.
So regarding,
Discuss further over tea.
okay.
But we want to wrap it up here, and then we go outside and we have tea and we discuss a little bit more during the tea, sir. So I would like to, on behalf of Victoria Memorial Hall, thank our speakers today, and I invite our accounts officer, madam, to please felicitate both the speakers as a token of gratitude from Victoria. Ma'am, please. I request the speakers to please join us. We would just like to give you a token of gratitude from Victoria. No. So, because the premises has time limitations, I request you all to empty the conference room, move outside, we'll have tea and have discussions for maybe another 15 minutes, and then you all will have to move out. Thank you so much for coming.